Our bodies come in different shapes and sizes, so doesn't it make sense that our weight loss plan should too? Noom builds a personal plan that factors in dietary restrictions, medical issues, and other personal needs so your plan works for you. One of the things I love about Noom is that it doesn't feel restrictive. Instead of focusing on what you can't eat, it helps you develop a healthier relationship with food. You can still enjoy your favorite treats in moderation, which makes it a sustainable approach that I can actually stick to. If you're looking for a personalized weight loss program that actually works, I highly recommend giving Noom a try. It's a program that's helped me achieve my goals and feel better than ever. Stay focused on what's important to you with Noom's psychology and biology-based approach. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com. Go check out Noom today.
This episode is brought to you by United Airlines. When you want to make the most of your vacation, book with United. They're an airline that cares about your travels as much as you do. United is transforming the flying experience with Bluetooth connectivity, screens, power at every seat, and bigger overhead bins to help fit everyone's bag. And with their app, you can skip the bag check line, get live updates, and more. Change the way you fly. Book your next trip today at united.com.
And we are recording. Okay, so we're back with My Uncle's Escaped Alcatraz with Ken, Mike, and we have a very special guest today, Amanda Williford. And Amanda works, I believe, is it the park system or that was related to Alcatraz Island?
It is a unit within the National Park Service, part of
Okay.
the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, who manages Alcatraz Island.
Fantastic. So, Amanda, why don't you tell our listeners and our audience just a little bit about what you do and what is the organization that you work for?
Sure. So I am the supervisory curator for Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and we manage currently the third largest collection in the National Park Service, which totals about 6.2 million items. We cover 4 different disciplines with natural history, archaeology, history, objects, and archives. And all of that is managed on behalf of the American people.
Fantastic. And then one of those things is obviously Alcatraz Island.
It is, indeed.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about how you, what is your responsibilities in regards to Alcatraz Island?
So we've acquired a lot of Alcatraz collections through a variety of means, mostly because we're still managing the island and need to make sure it's not going to fall apart into the bay. So we have materials that include federal documents like building plans for the prison and contracts to redo the dock. We also have a lot of family material from Alcatraz, from the correctional officers and their wives, spouses, children who lived on the island. We have oral histories from people who were living on there either by choice or by circumstance. So that includes the military time period, federal penitentiary, as well as the Indian occupation. So Alcatraz has a multi-layered history, and we're trying to capture all of those perspectives and help people understand a little bit more about the island.
I think a lot of people don't realize that Alcatraz started out as a military installation. Do you want to kind of let people know a little bit about that history?
Sure. So began in the 1850s, mainly as a defense site. It had gun batteries on there to help protect San Francisco Bay, which was the heart of some of the gold rush time period. So you had a lot of financial things going through the bay, and the Army was there to help protect it from potential invading forces. There was also the disciplinary barracks, because Alcatraz was not very hospitable, and it was an ideal place to kind of make sure people weren't encouraged to deviate from what the military was asking them to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that served as a disciplinary barracks all the way up from the 1850s until 1934.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's when it switched over to a federal penitentiary?
Yeah, so it stayed within the federal government system, but it switched agencies, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons took that over, and it became a department within that agency.
And then what were some of the first prisoners that were brought there?
The details of Alcatraz in terms of the federal penitentiary are not high on my research list, surprisingly. But the first prisoners were some leftover military. There were still some of those individuals who remained on the island, but were transferred into custody of the Bureau of Prisons. And then they sent a train of prisoners across the bay on a barge just to populate the prison from there. It was known mostly as one of those sites for potential escape risks, with a lot of deterrence, being more than a mile away from any sort of land and high currents with low temperatures in the water. So there were deterrents for going out to for escape risks.
Yeah. And how long have you been working for the for that organization?
I've been working with the Park Service for about 19 years. So this has been my only park. So it's a little bit remiss to not have that information about every aspect of the island. But our park is huge. It's like 80 miles north to south with 83,000 acres and a really diverse, complex history. So I have a surface level knowledge of a lot of different things in this park. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk with other researchers and enthusiasts to help build that knowledge and to help find collections that can contribute to knowing more about these areas.
How popular is Alcatraz Island with tourists?
Oh goodness. It's one of the most visited landmarks in San Francisco. It's hard to miss. It's sitting right in the middle of the bay, but Alcatraz definitely has its fan club and people who are always interested in parts of its history. I do often joke that we have 6.2 million items and everybody wants to see the same 60 because it just captures so much attention with that history of Alcatraz.
What are some of those 60 items that people like to see? I'm just saying you can just do like 4 or 5. I'm just saying what like in groups, and like what are some of the things that people like to see that out of the thousands?
The most requested is the 1962 escape material that was FBI evidence collected after finding or not finding the prisoners in their cells.
Yeah.
So any of that material is usually what people request.
That's interesting.
When Ken and I did the Expedition Unknown episode, and of course you were there with Josh and Stuart, we had the good fortune of seeing some of those items that the regular commonplace person is not permitted to see. They were the digging tools. One of the false grills was there. Some of the paints and the brushes were there. The periscope that they use for the escape was there. We got to see that. One of the life vests was there. One of the raincoats that was not used in the escape, but it's the raincoats that all the inmates were issued, was there. And of course, they weren't the real dummy heads, but they were scanned copies, so they were exact replicas of the original dummy heads. We got to see those as well. So I know for me, that was quite a treat to see the actual items used in the escape that is kept under lock and key normally.
Yes. So a lot of our items are definitely kept under lock and key, mostly for their own protection. And we are accountable to the public. So we want to make sure that we, number one, know what we have, and number two, know where it is, so that they can be preserved for future generations. We do allow access to the collection by appointment. So while we brought things out for this particular episode, people can request to see them. Or these items as well. The only items we do not bring out on any sort of regular basis are the original heads, mostly because they're super fragile. They were never intended to last for as long as they have. And so they're a little more delicate, and given the number of times that they would be requested out, it's just not great for the objects. And so we want to make sure that those are able to last, which is why we don't bring them out. However, if someone would like to see some of the tools, that can be arranged by appointment. And then we bring the materials down to the reading room and folks can take a look at it. Actually, right now, there are some materials on display at the San Francisco Airport Museum. They're doing an exhibit on the history of San Francisco. And so they've worked with us to get materials on loan, and one of the grills, a paddle, and I think some of the tools and FBI posters are on display there right now. So they do leave our building out of lock and key under certain circumstances. You know, I am a big supporter of making sure that these collections are available and made accessible. It doesn't do any good for the collection to sit in the dark in the back in a box. People should be able to have access to it within reason for the objects themselves.
That's cool. Well, that's cool that you're preserving all that stuff.
Yes.
And then what is the charter? Is that the main charter, is just to preserve historically all these items for, you know, public consumption, for public viewing, and how much of that history of the escape is to me, it's like I said, it's very important to the zeitgeist of Alcatraz.
So the National Park Service has a mission for preserving cultural and natural resources for future generations and for the enjoyment of the public. So it is part of our mission. Each park is required to have a scope of collection statement that outlines exactly what it does accept, because we don't want to be responsible for, say, all of San Francisco history. But because we're managing Alcatraz, we want all aspects of that history to be able to help interpret the site, maybe expand some of the knowledge and understanding of what took place there. So that is our mission. That is our goal, to do all of that.
Have y'all ever lost any items?
You want me to admit that on they're never intentionally missing items. We pride ourselves on a pretty strict inventory process within our system. We have databases that manage all of that. I host a lot of interns, and I tell them that if you leave here with nothing else, 2 things. Know, if you're working with a collection, know what you have and know where it is, because everything else can be recreated if you can find it.
So do you believe that the FBI gave y'all all the items?
I do. Anything that they had in their possession, they transferred over to us. I know that there is some question on absolutely everything that was in.
Yeah. So you actually have then the first raft that they built.
We have a piece of the raft. We're unsure if it's the original first raft or just part of a pontoon that was made. So many of the pieces that were left over from the escape were part of trial and error, as well as pieces that were intended for the 4th individual to use, and they didn't end up needing all of that. The raft piece that we have is unfortunately it didn't age well. How about that? It was plastic and it's glue and it's super crispy right now.
So it wasn't made out of the same raincoat material?
It is raincoat material, and so what's strange and just kind of tells you on how things work against each other or change over time. The one raincoat that we have that you all saw when we were doing the filming, that's really pliable still. It's on a hanger. It still has that kind of original integrity to it. The life vests that were made out of that same type of raincoat and the pontoon have not aged quite as well. And so the rubber has started to deteriorate. It's really, really brittle, and it's become super hard. And so it cracks really easily, and you need to lay it out flat and you can't bend anything. So that's one of the reasons of why we're not sure if that raft piece is actually a full-scale raft because we'll never be able to unroll it. It's currently just kind of rolled up.
Yeah.
And that was the way it was handed to us. And so we haven't been able to do any sort of treatment to it. And it's unlikely that we would be able to.
So was the pouch that was found in the bay, was that also made out of the same material?
The pouch we never got.
Oh.
It was never included on the list of materials transferred to us by the FBI. So I know that there is the letters, the photographs that often get mentioned as being found in the bay, but that was never one of the items that was transferred over to our.
Well, now I'm assuming you know who Michael Esslinger is.
Yes.
Okay. Do you know who Art Roderick is?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, he was the first U.S. Marshal, actually the second U.S. Marshal who worked the case.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they both told me that they saw the pouch along with the photographs, not the letter. But Michael said he actually saw it at the museum. He physically saw it one time. So are you saying y'all didn't have it at one time?
No, we don't have that.
Okay.
I know that there is one of the life vests looks very close to a pouch.
Okay.
Because it's all folded up and it's in that army green raincoat style of thing. If there were actual photographs, they would have been put into the archival collection. And
well, they're definitely listed in the FBI report.
Yes, they are definitely in the
they're
FBI
definitely
report.
there. So you're just saying they never turned them over to you.
Correct.
Okay.
So we have deeds of gift and transfer documentation in our accession files. Mm-hmm. We love paper trails. That's our life. We document everything to death because my goal is to not be the name that people curse in 50 years. So we document a lot of that stuff. And because this question has come up quite a few times of like, what happened to that pouch? What happened to the materials that was in there? I have reviewed the list of items that were transferred, and that was never on the transfer list to the National Park Service.
Gotcha.
So it could be that it's somewhere in the evidence holdings of the FBI or the U.S. Marshals, because they are now in charge of the case. But I can't provide what we were never given.
When did the FBI, did they hand all this stuff over all at once, or was it like in waves?
It was all at once.
And then when was that?
That was in the 80s.
80s. Okay.
Yes. And that was the time where the FBI was transferring cases over from their jurisdiction over to the U.S. Marshals. And so at some point, one of our park rangers managed to get involved and convince the FBI that it would be a great idea for the National Park Service to have this material, since the case was still kind of in limbo, and we were interpreting the site, and it of course has amazing pop culture connections, and people are always fascinated about this one event. So he managed somehow to get them to transfer custody over. So it's, it's still an open case, which is interesting, but we are managing that evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And
so if they ever found them and they wanted to retry them, they would have to come and get all the evidence from you?
Correct. Yeah, that would be an interesting situation, is figuring out.
Wouldn't it
be? Just a couple years ago, the U.S. Marshals actually did come by because they had a new team who was investigating the case, and they had never had access to the evidence before, and they were trying to, some of these folks weren't born when that escape happened, and so they're trying to give background information to this new team.
So it sounds like even the U.S. Marshals then do not have the items.
No,
you're either the only person or organization that has them, or they still remain with the FBI.
Yes, and so when they came to review this evidence, there was we were talking about what we have, and I was going over some of the rules of access, and like, you can look you're not allowed to touch unless you talk with me in advance, and maybe we'll see. Like, this is a different kind of factor of use, right? This is not an exhibit or a filming opportunity. This is a legit case that they're trying to investigate. And so I went over some of the rules, but they were talking and said, you know what? You were the right place for a lot of this to stay. If this had remained in our evidence locker, it would not be in the condition that it is right now. It would not have been saved like this. And I think that's a really interesting component of what Alcatraz does to a lot of everyday types of objects. It elevates them to this popular culture thing that people want those items to be preserved. That normally, like every day, we probably wouldn't even look twice at. And so the fact that we were holding on to them and they were in good condition, the FBI and the U.S. Marshals were grateful to us for keeping it.
You know what really shocked me is the FBI kept all of the materials that they found in John and Clarence's cell, and Frank Morris, but they returned back to the family the paintings that John and Clarence painted, and those were the paintings that they were using or painting. John was painting those in order to do the flesh color, on the dummy head. I never understood, unless it was done by accident, that they returned the paintings back, but they never returned anything else, just the paintings.
Well, they may have figured that the paint bottles or the paint that was in the smaller items were enough to.
Well, they also sent back in Clarence's inventory a paintbrush, which I know that you have the paintbrush that John used, but they did send the one back that Clarence had.
So I can't speak to why they kept certain things and why they didn't. Also at that point, it was when the escape happened. It was another escape. It didn't have this legendary status that it now does. Time does amazing things to history and tells us what is important and what isn't. So you have to sometimes give it a few decades to understand where it's going to stand in the rest of the history of a place or an organization.
Yeah, but I've never seen the amount of FBI documents that they've done on an escape outside of Alcatraz. And most of the documents were recorded and done in the first year. So, and then we were talking a couple of weeks ago about how, it took the FBI over 15 years before they ever turned it over to the U.S. Marshals. And we've never heard of a case that long before they ever call in the U.S. Marshals, if it was just a regular escape from prison, right?
I'm not as familiar with how the legal process works in terms of escapes. I maintain
based upon the experts that we've talked to in the government, they said that was highly unusual too, because normally U.S. Marshals are brought in pretty quick when there's this one was a little bit different. I wanted to ask you a little bit about when was the first time you actually stepped foot on Alcatraz Island?
I had started working for Golden Gate, and I think it was just a field trip for our museum program or our archives team, because our archives are actually located on the Presidio, which is still part of Golden Gate. But it was just one of those building our own knowledge base so that we knew what we were taking care of, and so that we were familiar with what the cell house looked like and how it sat in comparison to the New Industries building and kind of those components. So I am a native Californian, but I'm not a native San Franciscan. So it was one of those probably on my tourist checklist to do, but hadn't gotten around to it at that point. And now I think I'm a little jaded about going onto the island. It takes half a day or half a day for me to go out and check on exhibits and check on objects and do all of that. And then I have to come back on the boat. And so My perspective on the island's a little
What
bit.
was your first impression for that first visit?
Oh, it's hard to remember. I think it was cool because I'm a history nerd, right? And so all of this was, I've worked with the photographs, I had seen the plans, and now I'm there, and it was really cool. I'm not really into prison history very much. A lot of it is kind of depressing and sad, and so there was a really heavy element of that going onto the island. But then also tempered with my nerdiness of just like being excited and seeing history and being there at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I was there for the first time. I was like, the biggest thing, I was like, how did they get out of here? You know, it's like, how did they get out of here? I mean, it's just like, literally, you look at all the big bars and it's isolated, surrounded by water. You know, they had they had plenty of correctional officer guards there to accommodate for the 250 that were there. It wasn't like there was a deficit. So it was like, to me, it was just like, how did they do this? And it just to me, and I think that's part of the fascination of, anybody who can get out of incarceration, no matter what prison. It's a fascinating story because they're designed for you not to get out.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things that we have in the collection are the oral history interviews with the former incarcerated individuals who returned to the island when it was made up, open to the public. And they consciously made a choice to to pay for a ticket and get onto the boat and go to the place where they spent a good chunk of their time behind in a cell. And so when rangers would find out that these folks were spent time on the island and not by choice, they would do these interviews, and it's just fascinating to think that you'd want to come back to someplace that had this impact on your life. But to be able to capture those stories and then to be able to share them now about what it was like on the site from the inside, as well as we have correctional officer stories too. So we have these kind of dueling perspectives. And it adds an extra layer of interest to the island's history.
Well, one of the things that Ken has are letters from Whitey Bulger, who was one of the inmates at Alcatraz at the time of the brothers. And before he died, they wrote back and forth to each other for several years. And he spoke very fondly of his time at Alcatraz. They were good memories for him, which is sort of a strange reaction. You think he'd hate the place, anything to do with prison is bad. But he said that was some of his better times of his life while he was at Alcatraz. And he was one of those inmates that would go back from time to time and visit there. So I've seen a couple of the inmates, the recordings. I've read the transcripts because those are posted on your website. You can go and read them yourself. And so it's interesting listening to them. But, I think part of it is because of the history, because of the nostalgia that's attached to Alcatraz. And for them to be a part of something historical, it wasn't historical at the time. It was a punishment for them. But now it's in our DNA now. You say Alcatraz and everyone knows what you're talking about, even if they live on the East Coast or in other parts of the world. There's just something about it. I think the movie helped a lot. That gives a lot of romance kind of esque flavor to it. And so then now they're like, yeah, I was a part of that history. And so I think their view of it has been elevated because of that, rather than this was a harsh prison and this was a terrible punishment for us.
Yeah, and those are definitely reflected in a lot of the oral histories, both fond and like, this kind of sucked about being here all the time. I mean, it was prison. It's never a happy thing. But also tempered with like, it was actually not that bad at some cases. So I love that part of my job of being able to share or dispel some of these misinterpretations or these assumptions that a place or a time period have, or reiterate or reinforce those ideas and corroborate that is what took place, and that's what happened.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask this real quick. What is the biggest misconception that people have about Alcatraz that runs across, that you've come across to?
Where did Robert Stroud keep his birds?
Birdman of Alcatraz.
The Birdman of Alcatraz, who never actually had birds on the island at all. So, I don't deal with it as much as our rangers who are out on the island actually do. And, I'm sure that they have a list of questions that get asked every single day, if not multiple times a day, of like, which was Al Capone's cell and where did Robert Stroud keep his birds, amongst other things. But some of those things like, well, that's great. Maybe we can answer those. But did you also want to know that, hey, the island was also one of the biggest American Indian movements in civil rights history? And did you know that it was military longer than it was a federal penitentiary? Mm-hmm. So trying to help broaden people's understandings of our locations.
What were you going to say, Ken?
Well, I was going to ask you, Amanda. You have the unique ability to see all of the items that were used during the escape, the creativity and ingenuity, that the FBI identified in these items. When you look at them, all the things that you're overseeing, what's your personal take on it?
I don't have one.
That's a good political statement.
That's a safe one.
It's both political and it's also like, we're still finding bits and pieces. History's never static. And that's probably one of the best things that I love about my job is like one new thing can change an entire perspective on something that took place. I did an oral history with the guard who was on duty the night of the escape, just last October. He had never been interviewed before. He was 93.
Is this Charles German?
Herman.
I'm
Herman the German?
Herman the German is still alive?
He was the last time that I connected with him.
Wow.
Yeah. But his name almost never came up in any of the investigations, in any of the documentaries, or any of the reports on that. His name very rarely gets brought up. But he was in charge, or he was on the floor in that evening time period. Mm-hmm. We didn't have his interview. Now we do.
Is it on the website?
It is not yet on the website. So I've captured it. It's in our collection, but I have not had the resources to be able to fully transcribe it yet.
Because when we were doing research for the book, Whitey Bulger in the letters actually mentions Officer Herman
several times.
He referred, several times, and he referred to him as Herman the German. That was the nickname.
That's the reason I said that.
The inmates gave him. That's why I said, Officer German, but it was Herman. And one of the things that Whitey said was the day after the escape, that the inmates, they knew that he was the guard on duty. Mm-hmm. And he said that when the inmates were on the roof, when they went through the little vent, the air vent, and they took off the cover, and it landed on the roof, and it made a big noise, and it startled the seagulls that were on the roof. They're squawking, flying away, and the thud of the roof from the cover. And he said that Whitey heard the noise because he knew that night they were going to escape, and he was just waiting and listening to see what's going to happen. He hears the thud. He knows what it is, and Herman, Officer Herman, was on the floor, and he said he started making noise. He started banging on the bars and kind of banging his bed, and I guess some of the other inmates were doing the same thing to distract him. Mm. So he wouldn't investigate, and that obviously worked. And then the three got away, and then later, when the FBI was brought in and they were investigating the escape, and they're interviewing all the inmates and they're interviewing the guards, it was discovered that Officer Herman didn't do all of his duties that night. He didn't check on the inmates because he was behind on his schedule. He signed it off that he had, but he hadn't. And he was singularly blamed for the escape and was given 30 days. We have a letter in the book from that Warden Blackwell, penalized him, saying, because you did a dereliction of duty, you're 30 days, no pay. And he was the only guard that was blamed for any aspect of the escape. None of the other guards were.
And we have copies of his, his appeal against that particular punishment or disciplinary action.
Right. He felt it was unfair that he was, singled out, that all the other guards were just as culpable because I missed it too.
And we also have his interview now with his perspective on what took place. And that's why I love my job, because, sometimes we have activities that corroborate what one person says, and sometimes we have different perspectives on that. And so,
can you give us a little tease? Can you give us a little tease on what he told you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to know what he said.
So
all these years later,
he does say that he heard the noise and that he reported it to control, and that because he wasn't allowed to leave his position, he was relying on them to relay it to whoever needed to go out and do the double check on the noise that he heard. So whether or not it was connected with the escapees or with the other noises that were being made in the house, that did not come through. But he did say that he wasn't called into the warden's office until 3 days after the escape for interviews.
So
always strikes me interesting.
Do you think with Rob or Mike, could you reach out to Herman and ask him, would he be interested in talking?
Hopefully, if he's still alive. I mean, how long ago did you do that?
I don't know how you got in touch with him. So.
He wrote to me, or
he wrote to you.
He wrote to Alcatraz Island. And fortunately, I have great colleagues who know, hey, this is something that the museum program and Amanda should be brought aware of. And so they forwarded it on. And we did writing back and forth. He doesn't do email. Phone is very, very difficult. So I got permission to go out to Carson City and sit down with him, bring a recorder, and do some of that. It was still, we were unsure whether or not we'd actually be able to complete an oral history, but he wanted to make sure that his story or his side of the night was shared. So he kind of had a lot of it prepared in his head already. So some of the questions that I had listed, I wouldn't get to ask, but there were definitely new things that I don't think were talked about in any of the previous reviews or investigations into the escape. So again, that's just one of the things that I love about this type of field, is that new things come in all the time, and all of a sudden we're having these new discussions about something we thought we knew or we thought we had pinned down, and no, it's not true.
How long ago did you do that interview?
That was last October, almost a year.
Wow. Okay, so, and then what kind of shape was he in? Was he in decent shape?
No, he was going through some health problems. So I'm not entirely sure if he's still among us or not. So, getting him on something like this is probably beyond his skill set.
So I got to ask you, you keep kind of bringing up new items and new things that's been discovered. So I'm assuming you've seen the photograph of John and Clarence that we discovered in the early 70s in Brazil. So what's your thoughts or take on that?
It's hard to state anything about that. I mean, it's interesting, but I don't have like a personal knowledge of what they would have looked like at that age. So I don't like to confirm or deny that somebody is that person or that's a specific date. And that's something that we don't do. So one of the other things that our interns leave with is don't do the research for the researcher. Our job is to make sure that these things exist and that people have access to them, but not to interpret them for everyone.
Okay.
So
let me ask you a follow-up question in regard to that I've been kind of hoping to ask is, obviously you've been there for a number of years now. You're in charge of this huge collection, and obviously we're focusing on just one little piece of it because, like you said, you have over 6 million items in your collection, which covers all kinds of San Francisco history. But for those that are interested in Alcatraz, do you get a lot of researchers coming in to the archives to examine photos, documents, oral histories, the tools of the escape, or is it not too much and people are more focused on other areas of the archives?
It's Alcatraz is just one component of the bigger picture. We get about 500 research requests a year. And a lot of it is actually, it's split down the middle between park staff who actually come in to use our collections, and then the public who come in to use our collections. We have a lot of maintenance that needs to be done. And so we need to know what historic structures were constructed out of, what was original, what's been modified. And so that's a lot of the use of the archive. So the Alcatraz blueprint collection gets used a lot by park staff, not necessarily by the public. But I do get a lot of folks who are just interested or fascinated. And so if they come in and they say, I just wanted to know what you have, we kind of don't know what to do with them because we have so many items, but we can point them to some of our historic photos. And Alcatraz is often one of those photo binders that gets brought out a lot so that people have a chance to geek out on the history of that island. Again, it's a fascinating place, right? You mentioned, you say Alcatraz anywhere in the world and people know exactly where that is. And so it's always going to have that fascination. And so being able to supply some of that history and some of that background to enhance what people understand about the island, that's our goal. And that's what we do.
Well, and I can say personally, because, a couple of years ago, my wife and I, visited the archives when we were doing research for the book, and you were very helpful. You showed me the photographs, the documents. Didn't get to see the tools or anything, but that's okay. Got to see them later. So no, you were very helpful and brought out all kinds of interesting things that made it into the book. So thank you for that.
No problem. We're a big supporter of Archives for All. Anyone can come in with any interest and see this material and use it. And that, is one of the best things I love. I keep saying I love about my job, but also I love about archives. Like, I could hand the same collection to 5 different people and get 5 different responses about what they thought was interesting or what research they really wanted to do on that. And that's why we don't do the research for the researcher, because it's not on us to interpret why you need this collection. It's more of like, let's make sure you can find this collection. So we have a lot of those tools that you used when you were doing research that helps identify those collections that might be helpful. Because did you know you wanted to see the Henry family papers? No, because Henry family doesn't give you any sort of clue. But we listed in our special collections guide under Alcatraz federal penitentiary period, we say that it's part of the family that lived on there. Henry was a correctional officer from this year to this year. And so whether or not, hey, this would apply to my project. And the photo binders, very easy way of being able to just flip through history and see different perspectives. Maybe you want a different angle than the person who comes in 3 weeks of that cell house. And so you can get what you need or what you didn't even know you wanted, which is fun.
Yeah. I mean, I've had experience going through government archives before. I was doing a World War II doc, and I had access to their archives in March Air Force Base, and I was astounded how much they had. And it literally, I mean, I went there for one day, ended up spending 7 days there, because we
can geek you out for a really long time.
Exactly. It's pretty amazing. That's great that you guys do that, because I think this story is only going to get bigger. I'm just telling you, Amanda. I'm just warning you right now. Okay. So, because these 2 gentlemen have done an amazing job on their book. Have you read their book yet?
No, I have not.
You should read it. You should definitely read it. In fact,
or I know I've sent you photos, right, Mike?
Yeah. I made sure to give you guys the proper credit.
I always appreciate it.
This is exactly how you wanted it to be noted on the photographs and the other documents, but it's in the bookstore on the island. So
because they both did an amazing job of chronicling both the history of Ken's family and the history of Alcatraz and its inhabitants at that time, and then just the dynamic, and then the escape, and they have got some great contributions to, I think that, and that's why I was like initially, I mean, I don't know if you guys carry their book or have their book, but to me, it's a historical document. It really is. And it tells a fantastic story as well. Because I think what people don't understand is I don't think and the thing that I didn't understand when I read it, because initially I read it, they sent it to me, and they were just going to come on for like one podcast to kind of talk about it. And now we're into, 28 hours because I can't get enough of it. And a lot of our audience still can't get enough of it. And now it's kind of spiraled into a live investigation. But it's, what I didn't realize, getting back to what I was saying, I didn't realize the history of John and Clarence, and then just the backstory of their lives, which I thought was fascinating. And because that to me is like everything that people do as adults is motivated by their past and what brought them there. And so the way Ken was able to bring that to life, obviously being a family member and having his mother who's still alive and his aunt who's still alive, who could actually really kind of shepherd him through this labyrinth of stories that are completely all factual. And and all the pictures and all the other items that he's provided, the letters, the cards, when they're the letters from Alcatraz and all that stuff. And to me, it's just, that story is just because it's the greatest prison escape that's ever happened in the world, and it's and as far as you're concerned in your archives, you feel like it's and some of the federal agencies we talked to is like they're all believe that they didn't make it and they perished in San Francisco Bay. And so that's why it's so fascinating to hear that you guys are preserving that, because I think it is something that needs to be preserved, and I think it is part of public interest, and I don't think anything is ever going to happen like this ever again.
No, and so that comes to the thing of, do you want the question answered?
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, I know that there are people who need to know, but at the same time, that changes kind of the importance of some of the items that we're keeping. It doesn't have quite the fascination. I mean, the ingenuity would still be acknowledged, and the fact that the effort put into it was fantastic, and being really creative and resourceful, but it wouldn't have the same mystery that we thrive on, and that a lot of popular cultures are, pop culture is using to keep the story alive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I would say that solving this mystery might actually open up another mystery.
Yeah.
You never know which direction things are going to go in.
We'll have to send you a book.
Yeah.
Well,
aren't you? I know you're not into all this stuff, but aren't you the least bit interested now to read the book?
In some ways, yes. In other ways, it's another part of my park, and I work with a lot of sites that don't get quite the same attention, and I have many objects that need care, and trying to balance what some folks find important and what other folks find important is very difficult in our job, especially obligating resources and finances and all of that. What's important to one person is not as important to another, and how do we find that path forward?
Well, Ken, I'm putting you on the spot here. I just had a thought, because as Amanda was saying, they always like to add to the collection. What are your thoughts about the scanned letters from your uncles, about adding them to the collection? The prison letters. Would you be comfortable with that, or you want to keep that in the family?
I don't know. Let me think about that. Well, I mean, I guess I would ask Amanda. So this question, and maybe I will. So I've only seen the one photograph that was made the very next morning from the FBI on John and Clarence's cell. You know, it's the one that was published in the newspaper, and you can pretty much find online anywhere. But you mentioned that there were other photos. Are there other photos of those cells?
Yeah.
That were taken that next morning, besides the one that everybody sees?
There might have been the one, but there's an entire series of photographs that the FBI took in the investigation. And we do have all of those, or what we assume to be all of the photos, right? I mean, we only have what people give us.
Yeah.
Right.
So we haven't been able to go out and get that. And, you know, Alcatraz wasn't part of the National Park Service until 1972. That's a really long time for things to get sent everywhere else. So we do rely on folks to help contribute to that overall understanding of the island and the rest of our park. So we do have photos that the FBI handed over. It's just, there's a black and white set and a color set. And yes, that cell photograph is in there as well as other cells. They may not have taken 6 photographs of the same location, because photography at that point was a very different creature than what it is today and what we expect photography to be.
Right.
However, I think like 8 years ago or so, we did an open house event here at the museum program in our archives building. And we got some press coverage, showed up on the news. And then the next day, it was a weekend event. The next day, one of the daughters of one of the FBI investigators came in and said, my dad was in charge of investigating the 1962 escape. I have his records and I have his photos. Would you like them? I was like, yeah. Yeah, we'd really like to have that material if you wouldn't mind sharing it. And so she donated his records and his materials. And in there were more photographs that we had not had, that were not part of the FBI or like color set, and that we hadn't seen before. They had appeared in other FBI reports, but now we had a copy set in our collection that could be shared.
So if I went up to San Francisco, would I be able to look at those?
You did look at them. We did make them
show them to me.
Yeah, they're the ones that also have like this strange photograph of the guard with the life vest on, and he has like the dummy head in front of his face. I sort of
vaguely remember that. Okay, so I did look at it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So do y'all also maintain the FBI files?
No.
No.
Okay. So those are federal records, and those would be in the custody of the National Archives. So they're still under a federal agency. They're just not our federal agency.
Okay, I got you.
And that's in DC, right?
Yeah, there are some prisoner records down in the San Francisco branch of the National Archives, which is located in San Bruno. So this is part of that component of we weren't a park until 1972. It's a long time for things to get sent everywhere else. We're lucky with what we do have, and a lot of it has come through personal donation from families.
So Mike and myself have been trying to reach out to Mike. What is her name from Alcatraz? The store, the lady.
Elizabeth Sion.
Yeah.
Ryan.
So we were trying to maybe see if we could come out and do a book signing, and if we can, and ever have that opportunity, we might bring the letters that John and Clarence wrote, and maybe we can do some exchanging.
Yeah, when John and Clarence were at Alcatraz, when they were growing up, they were very close. It was a very close-knit family, and whenever they were incarcerated, they always wrote to their parents, let them know that they were okay, everything was fine. And together, between the two of them, they wrote about 15 letters from Alcatraz, from when they literally, like the day of, I think when Clarence arrived, or I can't remember if it was Clarence or John. I mean, like the day they were there, they wrote their first letter. Up until May, I believe, April or May of '62, just before they escaped, they're writing home, just talking about life in the prison, and just kind of like, oh yeah, the weather's like this, and I'm waiting to hear. There was another brother, Alfred, that I haven't heard from Alfred for a while. Just very casual conversations in the midst of, this is when they were digging, this is when they're doing the making the raft and the paddles, etc. And you would never guess from the letters what was actually going on, because it was, like I said, now, of course, they also know the letters were monitored, that they couldn't say, oh, the escape's going gray, we should be out of here in 2 weeks. They can't
See you
write
soon.
that.
Yeah.
See you soon.
They knew every letter was checked before it got mailed out to make sure they weren't sending any information that they couldn't reveal to family.
Yeah.
But it's just the remarkable documents at the time of what we know was happening, what they were writing to their family. And it's quite, it does add a lot of information about them personally, get to know them a little bit better as people.
Yes. And that's really what we love to be able to do is we're not in this to make money or anything like that. We can't charge anybody. So, one of the things is most of our material is in the public domain. People can use it for whatever purposes they want. You want to write a book, you can use our photographs and you don't have to worry about a use fee. But having that material on site allows so much more just background and richness to what it was like to be at that site, and to look at those letters, to both have just like, this was the day-to-day life on Alcatraz, and this was their interpretation of it, and this was their personal experience, and then also on this other layer of this was going on in the background, and they were painting heads and sweeping up hair from the barbershop to add to the dummy, and scraping mortar out of that. It opens up a lot more thought about one area and one time period and just a set of individuals. And so having more perspectives is, in my opinion, just icing on history.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have a fact, right? But then you have all of the different elements that led up to it and came after it, and all of the influences that had. I mean, the prison closed a year later because it wasn't inescapable anymore, or considered that. It was also super expensive to run the island, which had a major influence, but this escape helped drive that nail into the closure. And policies in the way folks were treated and the different considerations that were made at the prison, maybe things were loosened up a little bit, had impact on how they were able to get through a lot of the creation of the materials they did.
Well, yeah, that's the amazing thing about it. Everything that they used to escape, they got within the walls of the prison.
Yes.
Everything.
And so what changed at the prison that actually allowed them to do that? Were there, guards who weren't quite as vigilant? Was their privileges got expanded beyond what used to happen? Or were they just super resourceful and able to get things by? There's a lot of what ifs. Again, that's that mystery. And
I think it's probably a combination of both.
Everything, all of the above.
Yeah. Do you how much moving images, like film, do you have of Alcatraz?
Not very much. We have a couple of home videos that correctional officers have contributed, but it really was taboo in a way to have video on the island. You weren't allowed to bring your own camera and photograph.
Well, I'm just talking about stuff that was shot by the government that, kind of like highlighting it, just that kind of thing. They used to have those government things where they always do those government video films that archival.
Yeah. Very little. And it, sometimes that depends on who was in charge. If they didn't view it as a unique or special circumstance, which a lot of the workers at that time, it was a job.
Yeah.
Yeah. The photographs that I've come across, the Alcatraz photographs were usually either government agencies for some kind of government reason, or very rarely would they let the media onto the island. They were doing some kind of a story while it was still a prison, and they would take some pictures. Or it was the home family pictures, because there were families on the island. The guards had their wives and children there, and there was home pictures, because they did a lot of social things outside of their jobs, of course, just so they wouldn't go crazy. It's not just a prison for them; that it was a place for their families. But there weren't the casual kind of hanging out pictures that the guards took within the prison. They didn't do that. I'm sure there was probably rules against that.
Exactly.
Only officially recognized agencies could take photographs, either government or media, or it was just personal photographs that were later donated of, oh, this is us having Christmas with the family kind of a thing, or we had this special event, with some of the guards, or whatever.
Yeah, and there might have been some folks who were able to just kind of get in with their camera and take some photos. We got another photograph album from the Baker family, and I think it was George C. Baker. He took photographs of the inside of the prison, but mostly it was just like his job. Here's the key case. Here's where I sit. and then some of the stock photographs that the government would have produced of, like, this is the kitchen, and here are prisoners who are making bread today. That kind of stuff, the official photographs. He had copies of those too. So there was this kind of blend of both personal imagery and professional or official photography. So you have the rules, definitely. Even today, that's restricted in terms of what you take photographs of inside any sort of jail or prison. But you also had just a different time period of photography. It was expensive. It was not in your back pocket the way that cameras are these days for us. And so we have this assumption that they should have been taking photos, and they don't exist.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for all this information. Thank you for participating. I know you can't, you're keeping your opinions close to the vest there, so we won't put you in a position of trying to come up with an answer. But
it's job security too, right? I mean, if I say I don't have an opinion, come in and make your own, we're going to get folks who want to come in and look at the collection and kind of come to their own conclusion.
And I encourage anybody who hasn't been to Alcatraz, it is something to see. It's one of those things you have to see at least once. You have to experience, you have to go to really kind of, can't even imagine. I mean, I saw it over 20 some years ago, but even just the ride in the boat out there, I just kind of imagined what it must have been like for someone who was going to be who was on the way to be incarcerated. What an intimidating way to approach a prison is, that's surrounded. It just seems something, it's almost medieval, an island surrounded by water, prison island surrounded by water. And so I definitely encourage, definitely it's a fascinating experience. It's a must do. And you can see all the work that Amanda's put into it and her team, preserving all that stuff. I think it's important to preserve.
Yes, I agree.
And hopefully you'll get some more documents from Ken.
Always happy to talk about new material coming in. As I've been mentioning, it comes in all the time and kind of randomly. So we don't have the resources to be able to go out and solicit for things. That's kind of against our ethics rules anyways, but we do appreciate when folks share their knowledge and their resources to help broaden that picture and broaden that history and add to the mystery in some cases. Add to it
or also solve it.
I'll solve it.
Maybe we'll be bringing some people to the island.
You do. I'm pretty sure we know a couple of other interested parties who would also like to be aware.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Amanda, thank you so much. You've been a pleasure. And we really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, no problem. This was fun. Thank you.
All right. All right, you guys. Take care, guys.
All right.
Okay.
Aprovecha los adelantos de Black Friday en JCPenney, con grandes ahorros en joyería y hogar, como hasta 60% de descuento en muebles, colchones, cortinas y persianas, o hasta 75% en joyería fina con un descuento de 40% que se aplica automáticamente al pagar. Más ofertas, grandes ahorros. JCPenney. Vale la pena. Ofertas válidas hasta el 2 de noviembre en selección de estilos. Se excluyen de los cupones. Aplican exclusiones. Detalles en la tienda jcp.com.